Good morning. My name is Bassel Akar, and it's a real privilege to present at this conference, even though I could not be there in person. So thank you for having me. In this presentation, I show how the politics of history in the education sector have undermined certain forms of or processes of curriculum reform and even learning and teaching by excluding virtually all actors in history education development except politicians. And I also show how history teachers, through movements in civil society, are able to create pathways that start to transform these barriers and blockages that I will show you now. In Lebanon, our first national curriculum was in 1946, following the French Mandate, or independence from the French Mandate. The second curriculum was, so that curriculum was reformed this first time in 1968, following the rise of Arab nationalism. So during the second national curriculum, there was a greater Arabization of the national curriculum. We then had a civil war, 1975 to 1990, followed by a peace accord, and then the third national curriculum in 97. Now, in 1997, the only program of study that was not approved was history education, because of, well, many reasons, but mostly a difference in the consensus on the single narrative, on how we're going to agree on what happened in the past, but agreeing on that one story. In 2000 and 2010, there were additional attempts, and they failed as well. So, today, it's been 26 years since we reviewed or reformed our national curriculum. And it's been half a century now that we've been teaching the same history education curriculum, which was put together last in 1968 to 1970. Now, this is officially, we do have obviously private schools and many public schools that have developed their own history education curriculum, but the official exams still rely on the national curriculum that was last reviewed in 1970. Why? So, the curricular approach that Lebanon takes with history is that it is a single narrative. This is a framework taken from Seixas. It's a book chapter he wrote in 2000. And so we have several approaches to looking at history in education. One is a single narrative, or the grand narrative, which is finding ways of interpreting certain events, leaving out certain accounts, with the aim of fostering social cohesion, generating a collective memory that would prevent conflict. So under this idea, the diversity of interpretations and the diversity of resources would generate conflict. And so the approaches to learning and teaching that this supports is memorization, as opposed to disciplinary approaches to learning and teaching history that rely on the diversity of sources to generate evidence to build claims about the past. And some would view this as a threat to collective memory. And both have political philosophies behind them. Yeah, so the single narrative approach identifies mostly with an authoritarian approach to governance, whereas the disciplinary would embraces and capitalizes on the diversity of narratives, reflects more liberal democracy. This image is an image of a protest in during one of the curriculum reforms for history education only. And it was a protest because certain narratives were left out while others were emphasized on. So this shows how contentious the issue of writing and teaching history for schools is in Lebanon. The dominant approaches for reform in Lebanon have been creating toolkits, lesson plans, activities for teachers to use inside their classrooms. And these materials are often celebrated and decorated by organizations and government agencies. Unfortunately, these resources get shelved, and we can refer to these shelves as graveyards of resources, which is what we have. Through this approach, teachers are seen as messengers. And so we prepare something for teachers to to facilitate inside a classroom. So here is a lesson for your history class. Take this and teach it. And this is not sustainable because teachers have not developed it inside their classroom, and for many other reasons that we'll see later. So some ideas behind, or some theory behind these approaches to the exclusion and inclusion of stakeholders in history education development. So how we approach history education reform reflects greatly the politics of governance in a country. Yeah, this is by Bernstein. And in Lebanon, we have chronic gridlock at the government level, with periods of interim governments, often without a president, conflicts among political cartels that are leading the country. And so when we look at how history is approached in education reform, similarly, we have differences in how we recall the past and what we want to remember and what we don't want to remember. And the participation is also usually exclusive. So we have this common phrase in Lebanon: you don't worry about it, we will take care of it. You vote for us and we'll do the rest. Yeah? and these are features of an authoritarian form of governance. Now, in history, education, I'm going to quickly outline certain features of how in 2011 a movement led by history education teachers and researchers slowly created an organization, and at the very end, which is current right now, has now formed a partnership with the Ministry of Education. So here we have an approach with the ministry, which is creating this one narrative about the past, which continued to fail. And we have another direction which conflicts with the government's approach. Yeah? But then how did and why did the government or the Ministry of Education at the end say, could you train our trainers? So this is a transformation. It's a very significant one. And it started, I would say, or the momentum picked up in 2011 when the Lebanese Association for Educational Studies, this is a research hub for education professors in Lebanon, organized a conference on history education. And from this, history education teachers started to, met and started to talk about their practices inside the classroom. And it wasn't just about their practices, but it was also about the injustices of how we're engaging children in history. These are images of some of the activities that were organized that brought history education teachers together to talk about disciplinary approaches to learning and teaching history, which was a very big transformation. It was a big risk because this is not what many of the political cartels that lead the country really want. In this example, I'm going to give only one example of a unit plan that a teacher developed. This is a history teacher in South Lebanon. This short article was published in one of the issues of Public History Weekly, and it is a quick narrative about how a history teacher developed a unit plan on teaching the Civil War that took place in 1975 to 1990. And her inquiry question was, why did the Civil War begin in 1975? And here she was focusing on the causes of the Civil War. And in this article, she talks about her journey, personal journey, and the journey of how she engaged with the students and the school administration and even some of the parents. One really important component behind this, as I will call movement, was the engagement with the public. So these history teachers, when they would develop these unit plans, of course with support and feedback, and it wasn't just developing something and coming back. There was continuous work and planning and observations and feedback. Was bringing back these experiences into a public forum and presenting them, and continuously inviting those from the Ministry of Education and different actors in civil society in the conversations of the risks that teachers took inside the classroom. with time, the ministry or representatives from the ministry became interested. This was one breakthrough, and a memorandum of understanding was signed between the NGO that was formed, the Lebanese Association for History. This was formed in 2013. And in this memorandum of understanding, it established a relationship between the two groups. At the same time, we started to see progress in how we are approaching or developing approaches to learning about the past in Lebanon. Teachers started to develop resources, and funding was generated gradually to create platforms online where we could share these resources and the experiences of teachers, including the LAH, the Lebanese Association for History website. To reflect a little bit on theories of the significance of teacher professional movements, Stenhouse, Skilbeck, Stenhouse and Skilbeck are curriculum theorists who argued and showed in their casework the contributions of teachers and school-based practitioners when they are engaged as researchers of learning and colleagues when reflecting on a program or a program of study, and in this case, history. Fullan, this is a very interesting article that examines the contributions of the journal Teaching History, which is where the articles are written by, if not co-authored by, history education teachers in the UK, and I believe in some other parts of the world as well. So through these short articles where teachers document and reflect on their approaches inside the classroom, reflecting on theory as well, Fullan argues that the disciplinary and pedagogical knowledge of how we engage children in history discourse has changed over time and has become more inclusive. I will conclude with these three quick ideas of factors that I've observed, my colleagues and I have observed, that opened this pathway, that supported this pathway, that allowed for a more inclusive participation in history discourse. So one was inspiration. Inspiration means that the objectives of, let's say, presenting work or working with history teachers was not to change practice inside the classroom. It was to inspire teachers by showing them, look, here's what one teacher did. And for those who become inspired, can then, it's easier for them to participate in these activities because the motivation is intrinsic. Autonomy is very important. When they're given autonomy to experiment, etc., then here they are likely to take risks and go beyond this idea of having to teach this one story. And of course, engaging as co-researchers with colleagues and students. co-researchers meaning reflecting on learning. These are other variables that I do not seem to have enough time to go through right now. But I will finally reflect on the professional movements which are led by teachers, yeah, and empowering teachers to widen the circle for genuine critical engagement with historical discourse, yeah, engaging children, students, and even parents, but at the school level. Thank you very much.